It was the fall of 1973, and in high schools all across America, young men were going to battle on the football field. And the young man that we're looking at here, his name is Buddy Miley. And he was the star quarterback for a high school football team in Warminster, Pennsylvania, which is a small town outside of Philadelphia. And Buddy was quite a character. He was larger than life. Just his personality and how he played. He liked to have his long hair flowing out of his helmet, and he would wear white shoes on the football field, even though nobody else wore white shoes. And he liked to pattern himself after the great quarterback Joe Namath, who was a very flamboyant character. And he was the star of the team, and people had in their mind a future planned out for Buddy, that he was going to be a professional football player and that he was going to be a star. There was something about him that he was just born to be a star, and he was a born athlete. So that's Buddy getting tackled by 3 or 4 players from the other team. Buddy's wearing the dark jersey, and Buddy went down. Unfortunately, that was a very dangerous hit on Buddy, and he went down head first, and he sustained a serious neck injury. The extent of his injury was so serious that he ended up being paralyzed from the neck down. And it's very tragic. That was the end of his football playing days at that time. And that injury made headlines in the local newspapers and really the media across the United States. Here was a young star football player whose dreams had been shattered. Buddy's younger brother, Jimmy, who's the blonde guy there standing up there, number 8, he had been drafted to play baseball for the Los Angeles Dodgers. He was a star athlete himself as well in baseball and had this great opportunity in front of him. The whole time he was there, Jimmy couldn't get his mind off his brother Buddy. And he felt guilty that he had this opportunity to be a professional athlete and his brother didn't. And he actually left the training camp and went home to take care of his brother. So there's Buddy in the wheelchair, and that's Jimmy helping him get into the family van. Jimmy and his mother stayed home, took care of his brother day in and day out, and they had to learn how to care for him, how to give him medications and so forth. And that was their life. That was Jimmy's life, and that was their mom's life, staying home and looking after Buddy. And what really impacted me about this story was just the love that this family had for each other and the love that Jimmy and Buddy had for each other. For Jimmy to turn down this opportunity to play pro sports, look after his brother, it takes a very special type of person to do that, for sure. They built a special room for him on the side of the house, and quite a few attempts were made to try to find a way for Buddy to walk again. And the family always held out hope that someday, somehow, Buddy would walk again. But it became very apparent over time, as the years went on, that unfortunately wasn't going to happen. And after exhausting every option available to them at the time that they knew about, Buddy kind of resigned to the fact that this was his fate in life and he wasn't going to walk again. He became a burden to his family in his eyes. He didn't like it how Jimmy had to give up so much to take care of him and how his mom was always having to look after him. And Buddy had the idea that he wanted to end his life. And because he was paralyzed from the neck down, he couldn't really do that on his own. He couldn't feed himself, he couldn't dress himself, he couldn't do a lot of the basic things that you and I take for granted every day. And then when he had thoughts of ending his own life, he couldn't even do that on his own, and he felt even more helpless. And a controversial figure at the time in the news was Dr. Jack Kevorkian. I'm sure everyone's familiar with him. Very controversial. Obviously, he's a polarizing figure. And Buddy knew where he stood in terms of what he wanted to do. And when he heard about Dr. Kevorkian, he saw it as an opportunity to get some help. At the same time, though, he wasn't able to do it on his own. He needed somebody that he could ask to help him to make this happen. He thought about who he could trust, and he talked to his brother Jimmy. That's Jimmy nowadays. That's a recent photo of Jimmy. Talked to his brother Jimmy and told him, he said, Jimmy, I've heard about Dr. Kevorkian. Why don't we just end this? End the pain, end the suffering. This way it'll be easier for you and Mom. Jimmy didn't want anything to do with it. Right away, Jimmy said no. I mean, obviously he loved his brother, and Jimmy didn't mind caring for him. But over time, Buddy impressed on him the fact that this is what he wanted. Eventually, as much as Jimmy loved his brother, he basically told him that I'll do anything for you, whatever you want. And he came to the realization that this is what Buddy wants the most. Jimmy made arrangements to get in touch with Dr. Kevorkian and to make arrangements to meet with him secretly in Michigan, which is where Dr. Kevorkian lived and worked. And also, it was dangerous because they could have been arrested for being an accomplice to murder if they were caught. So Dr. Kevorkian had already been in trouble with the law prior to this, and so they were putting themselves at a great risk even entertaining this idea. So it was a very dangerous undertaking for the two of them to do, and they had to do everything very secretly. This is a photo of this myself in the middle, and that's Jimmy Miley there. And the other gentleman there on the left is a man by the name of Mark Schneider, who is an American businessman and a friend of the Miley family. He grew up with Buddy and Jimmy in their home, went to high school with them, and lived through this experience with them. He was in their house day by day and saw the struggles that they went through. Saw a lot of things that a lot of other people didn't see, as a matter of fact, because there were reporters there was media there all the time, and Buddy and Jimmy and their family, they would always put on a brave face and they would always put on a smile and try to stay positive. But Mark saw what went on when the cameras and the reporters would leave and what was really going on behind the scenes. And Mark was so moved by their story that he felt that it would make a great film, and a movie would be a great medium to help share their story with the world. I had never met Mark before, and one day I just got an email from this person I had never met and said, "You don't know me, but I would like you to help me make this movie." And my first impression was, what is this? Who is this guy? I don't know why. Something inside of me just felt like, let's give it a shot and see what happens, right? You never know. So I went out there to meet with him, and Jimmy was there. And when I first met Mark, I was just impressed by his just overwhelming drive and passion to make this happen. So one of the things Mark told me right at the beginning was, he said, I do not want to hire a lot of people and have a big giant film crew. He said, when you look on the internet and you look at pictures of movies behind the scenes, you see pictures like this, okay? There's 13 people in this picture, I counted, okay? That's an average size film crew. They can even be bigger than that a lot of times. It can be done with a smaller crew of people. We all just have to work a little bit harder, and everybody has to multitask. So this is what he wanted to avoid doing. This is a, typical film crew. And I'm going to show you a picture of what our film set looked like, a lot different. So that's me behind the camera and a sound guy. A lot of times that was pretty much it. We might have had one or two people just to help out with whatever we needed, a hair and makeup person who wouldn't be in the picture, but that's me and a sound guy. There's our film crew. And there's our actors, Buddy and Jimmy. Now, I should point out too that not all of our scenes was this small of a crew. We did have a lot of scenes where we had more people, but I just thought that this is a funny example of just the contrast of, this was not a big Hollywood production, and we all had to multitask a lot. The first step in our process was to write a script. And this process took a long time, several months we're talking about, a long time. And Mark would send me drafts as he would go. And at this point, it was only Mark and I. This was it. We didn't have any actors. We didn't have any crew people. It was just me and Mark. All right. So the next step was to find some actors. And so Mark found these two actors just based on how they looked, really. He just went on the internet. He really didn't go through a whole audition process. He didn't, normally you'd have, you'd audition a large number of people, come in, get them to read some lines and that kind of thing. He didn't do any of that. He liked their picture, you're good, you get the part. So the gentleman there on the left, his name is Sean Dwyer, and he got the part of Buddy, and Reese Presley on the right got the part of Jimmy. And you can see the resemblance there. However, we found out very quickly that Sean, who got the part of Buddy, had a previous commitment in Japan. So our plan was to start shooting in the spring of this year. We're talking about like late February, early March of 2019. And Sean was leaving to go to Japan in March. So that wasn't going to work. So we realized that we're going to have to move very quickly, and we're going to have to start a lot sooner than we had anticipated. This is November of 2018, and Sean's leaving in March, so we had a very short window to get his scenes done. We had to start right away shooting the outdoor scenes because Mark didn't want any snow in the movie, okay? This was November, okay? And we have until March. And Mark says, I don't want any snow. This can't look like winter. It needs to look like... There were a few scenes where it had to be hot outside, where the actors were supposed to talk about how hot it was outside. And I said, how are we going to do this? So I was always on looking at the Weather Network every day. If anybody wanted to know what the weather is, I was the one who could tell you every hour of every day. As soon as we had a day without snow or a sunny day, we were outside shooting the outdoor scenes. We didn't have a lot of outdoor scenes. Most of the movie took place in Buddy's room because he was bedridden, and the majority of the movie was Buddy lying in bed in his room. But there were enough scenes outdoors that we needed to move quickly and to get those done before we had snow. So we started right away shooting some outdoor scenes. These are pictures from our very first day of filming. And we had a scene where we had a flashback of Buddy and Jimmy when they were little kids. And so we found two boys who looked like our actors as children. And actually the boy who plays Jimmy there is actually our neighbor's son. And I had a hard time finding actors. I'm like, you know what, my neighbor's kid, he looks the part, he can do it. They didn't have a lot of lines, they just had to throw a football and play catch in the backyard. That's pretty much what the scene was. And we didn't really have a finished script, because remember, this is October 28th. The date on the script was November 13th. So this was almost a month before our script was done, but we had this scene done, and we had a nice fall day. I'm like, let's do that scene now while we can, before we have any snow. So we went outside, we got our two kids, and we shot a scene of them playing football. So that was the first day. And it was already starting to get cold, and those kids were shivering, but they couldn't wear coats. You know, we couldn't have any coats and jackets on. It had to look warm. I kind of felt bad for them. But we did it. We pulled it off, and the kids did a great job. So we were moving quickly, and we had to get the outdoor scenes done right away. And we would have some days when it would snow like crazy. And I would be like, oh, what are we going to do? Mark was in Panama, okay, in a nice, warm, sunny house on the beach during this. And so I would send him pictures of the snow, and I'd be like, look, what are we going to do? It's snowing. But you know what? We were so fortunate because we would have a lot of snow, and then a day or two later it would all be gone. And we didn't have this early winter like we have this year. And we were really fortunate that the winter took so long as it did. We were able to shoot outdoor scenes right into the middle of December without any issues. So that was great. The weather cooperated that way. So moving on, we needed a house for the outdoor scenes. Okay, because a lot of the scenes took place in the Miley's front yard. So Mark and I took time to look for houses in Hamilton. Originally we thought Hamilton would be a great location because the actors are in Toronto and I'm in Woodstock, and it's kind of halfway. We can kind of meet halfway, and we also like the look of the neighborhoods there. So these are just some of the houses that we looked at. These are all houses in Hamilton. Mark and I spent so much time on the internet looking at houses. It's crazy. We spent so much time. Again, it was just the two of us. Normally you would have somebody hired to do just this job. They'd be called a location scout. And their job 24/7 would be to look for houses, and we wouldn't have to deal with that, right? But because it was only two of us, we had to do everything ourselves. And Mark was in town for a couple days, and we actually went to Hamilton together. We went to the house, and we had arranged to meet the owner. We looked at it, and he loved it, and we were all good with it. He was happy to let us use it, and he said, "I want $1,000 a day to use my house." And we needed the house for at least 15, 20 days, right? So Mark was like, no, that's not going to happen. And that was really discouraging because we had spent so much time to find this house, and now we were back at square one. So I thought, what am I going to do, right? I mean, if we try to find a house in Toronto, it's going to be the same thing. People are going to want a lot of money. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to try to find something locally, you know? And I posted something on Facebook in a local Woodstock community Facebook page. I don't remember, it's the Woodstock News and Views or something like that. And I said, we're making a film, we have a, we have a tight deadline, we need a house. If somebody has a house, we can use this outside on your front yard. We're not even going to be inside the house, we just need the outside. And right away, within a few hours, I had 5 or 6 people message me right away and say, hey, you can use our house, sure, no problem. And I thought, wow, this is great, this is great. That's the benefit of being in a great community like Woodstock. You know, people just are more than happy to help, right? It was great. And so I had options, right? I had a few different houses to choose from now. So I actually found a house in Innerkip that we used, and this is the house. And the owner of the house was more than happy to let us use the house. It was within our budget. And the house looks the part, it fits the time frame, the time period, because the movie that we were making tells a story that takes place in the mid-90s. So we can't have too modern of a house. It needs to look like a house that you'd expect to see in 1994, 95, 96, somewhere in there. Another thing we needed, because of the time frame of the film being in the 90s, is we needed some older vehicles. Okay, so if you're making a film that's supposed to be in 1996, you can't have modern cars and trucks driving by in the movie, right? Those are things a lot of times people don't think about. So here's a couple vehicles that I found that we used in the movie. I found them through Kijiji, just cars that were for sale. Now these took me a long time to find. I mean, I spent weeks looking for cars and vans on Kijiji that would be the right time period, but also be in good shape, right? That van was like a 94 Safari van, and it didn't have a lot of rust on it, which was rare because a lot of the older vans were all rusted out, right? And we can't have a van that looks supposed to be 2 years old, looks like it's 30 years old. So it was hard to find, but this van was actually right around the corner from my house, which was perfect. And I didn't even test drive it or anything. I didn't care if it drove, I just cared how it looked, really. Most of the time it was going to be parked in the driveway, I just had to look the part. So I just went and looked at it one day. It was a cold, snowy day. I just walked over to the guy's house. I looked at the van. I'm like, yep, we'll take it. And it was great. It worked perfectly. The other car, a really funny story. I had arranged one day to shoot. We were shooting a scene outside the house with this old car. I had a car in the scene where the people get in the car and they drive away. I had made arrangements to have somebody bring an old car. And on the day of the shooting, they didn't show up. And we were waiting and waiting. We had the actors, we had everybody standing by waiting. It was half an hour waiting, nobody showed up. I tried to call the guy, he wasn't answering his phone. I'm like, what are we gonna do? I said, all right, well, never mind, we'll just use the van and we'll have to change the story somehow where the people were getting in the van instead of getting in their own car. We'll have to figure out how to make it work. So I got in my car and I went to go pick up the van. And I started driving, this was in Innerkip. I drove past this little church there in Innerkip. As I was driving past the church, out of the corner of my eye, I just happened to see that car in the parking lot. And I stopped and I said, you know what, I'm going to go see what's going on with this little car. So I pulled over, I went into the church. There was a group of people there having a meeting in the church, and I stuck my head in the door and I said, sorry to interrupt your meeting, but we're just making a film down the street, like a block away. We need an old car, and I noticed an older looking car in the parking lot. Does anybody here own that car? And a gentleman stood up and he said, yeah, that's my car. And I said, can we borrow it for like 15 minutes just to shoot this scene really quick? And I mean, he didn't know who I was. I didn't know who he was, anything. He's like, yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, fine. Let's go right now. I said, we can wait till you're done your meeting. He's like, no, that's fine. Let's do it right now. So I'm like, this is perfect. You know, I love these small communities. If we were to do that in a bigger city, chances are that wouldn't happen. So he was like, yeah, no problem. So we went down there. We brought his car. It worked perfectly. We shot the scene. And the funny thing is, when he arrived on the set, turns out he was the cousin of the guy who was doing sound for us that day. They knew each other. And I told the sound guy, I was like, why didn't you tell me your cousin had an old car? It would have saved us a lot of trouble. All right? So, anyways, it was a great story. And, you know, little things like that happened throughout the filming just made it so interesting. And that was the first scene that we were shooting that day. And when that happened, I thought, you know what, today's going to be a good day if that's how we're starting our day. You know, things just fell into place. It was great. The other thing was we were shooting outside in the cold, and Mark didn't want any snow. So we had to clear away snow sometimes. You can see the picture there in the top right. That's me, and there's Sean in his wheelchair. And you can see there's snow on the sidewalk. So we literally had to shovel snow off the sidewalk so that we wouldn't see it in the shot. And the picture right below it, I think, is the funniest, the one in the bottom right. So that's Buddy and Jimmy sitting out, they're supposed to be sitting outside on a hot summer day. And in the script, they even talk about, oh, it's so hot, I'm so hot outside, right? And that's what they say. And they're wearing t-shirts. But you can see that myself and the camera, I'm wearing a big parka and gloves and a hat. I was freezing. Those of us behind the camera, we got to dress up nice and warm, but the actors, they were just, you know, shivering. And it was funny because they would literally wear their winter coats right up until we said action, and then they would throw their coats off so we wouldn't see them, and then they would sit down and do their lines and then put their coats back on. I felt really bad for them. And the picture on the left there is actually at Southside Park here in Woodstock. And they're sitting on a park bench talking, which that was the scene, was that they have a conversation on a park bench. And that park bench was like sitting on a block of ice. It was just freezing cold. Oh, it was so hard for the actors. And that was a long scene where they sit and talk for a long time. And I really commend them, though, because they did a great job of really getting into character, and they didn't let the cold hinder them at all from conveying the different emotions that they needed to. So they did a great job. That's us at the house in Innerkip. There at the bottom left picture, and that we can see we're in the front lawn of the house, and we have the van parked in the driveway. That guy right there, he's the owner of the house, and he asked us if he could be in the film. He thought it would be fun. He's not an actor or anything, and I was like, sure, we can give you a part. So originally I just thought he'd be in the background walking by the house or something like that, but we actually gave him a few lines to say, just for fun. We had him walk up and have a little bit of dialogue, so that was fun for him too. Why not include him in the film, because he was so nice to let us use his house. So anyways, that's a few more shots of us outside. So the weather was a big factor, but we made it work. So we were able to finish all the outside shots by like mid to late December. We got it all done, which was great. We made it happen without any snow in the film. So then when that was done, we had to start planning for the interior shots. So the bulk of the movie took place inside. We needed a separate house for that. So even though in the film you'll see people inside and then you'll see them outside, it's actually two different houses. So we wanted to do all the interior scenes in Toronto. This is the house that we found in Toronto. We were not going to see the outside of the house. We never saw the outside. The outside didn't matter. It was the inside that mattered. And again, we had to find an older looking house that fit the part. We were telling a story that took place in the mid-90s, so their house probably would have had items in it from the 70s and 80s that they still had kept around. So we couldn't have like flat screen TVs and things like that in this house. It had to look like an old house. And this house inside looked perfect. It looked like an old house from the 70s or 80s, which was great. The only thing is it's a very small house. This house also had to serve as accommodations for 6 people, because we had myself and a number of other crew people who were coming from Woodstock to Toronto to work on the film, and we needed a place to stay. So the house did double duty in that the house was our location for filming, but it was also our accommodations at the same time. So we had 6 people in this little house, and we made it work. It actually had a lot of rooms in the basement, and we got to know each other really well, you know, which was great. Made it work. So that's the house that we had. So first thing we had to do was to decorate the inside of the house. So here's some photos of the inside of the house. We had a box of family photos that Jimmy sent us. These were actual pictures of the Miley family, and we put them in some frames, and Katrina hung them up around the house, which was great to have, and also some older items like old lamps and things like that to try to give it that older, dated look. In this room here, we set up as Buddy's room. We rented this bed and some other medical props. There's a website called Medical Movie Props in Hamilton, and it's an old hospital. And there's a gentleman there who decided to keep all the old medical things that they were going to throw away, which was great because he had an idea that they might be useful to somebody who was making a film and rent them out for props. So he literally has like the whole basement of the hospital is full of any kind of medical thing you can imagine. It's amazing. And he said all this stuff was all supposed to be thrown out or recycled, and he's just like a pack rat. He would just keep it all and store it all in closets, and it's great. He's got all kinds of stuff. So we went there and found this bed that looked like the bed that Buddy had, and also there was some other medical things that we rented from them, and we set up this room to look like Buddy's room. So I was pretty happy with how we were able to make the house look, and thankfully, the owners of the house who were renting it out as an Airbnb, they lived right next door. They didn't seem to mind that we were making a lot of noise and bring people coming and going. They didn't care. They were great. I was just hoping they wouldn't come in and see that we had completely redecorated the house. There was one time that the owner stopped by to drop something or tell us something about a key or something like that. And she came in at the front door and she saw we had stuff piled up everywhere, and she didn't seem to mind at all. So I'm like, okay, this is good. In fact, in one scene, we even had to remove the bathroom door off, take it right off and put it in the living room because it was in the way of what we were doing. And it was crazy, but they didn't seem to mind. And because we were using the house as our accommodations, we would have people sleeping in different rooms, but then if we needed to film in that room, they would have to move all their stuff into another room. We'd film in that room, and then we'd put all our stuff back in that room. We were always moving stuff from room to room, and there was just stuff all over the place. It was crazy, but it was fun. It was a fun experience, for sure. Absolutely. You guys broke up, now you're eating lunch together.
Yay!
That was a quick breakup.
I know, right? First scene, they're like,
yeah.
This is Sean, this is Jacqueline, now make out.
Yeah.
Then the second time I see him, I'm breaking up with him. Mm-hmm. It's like it's an autobiography of my life.
Such a roller coaster, right?
Now we're about to have some stress in the next scene.
Now we're stress eating. Right. Emotional eating.
Together. One day, it was one of our crew members' birthday. She was doing, her job was to do people's makeup. And it was her birthday one day, and we were really busy that day. We didn't really have time to do anything special for her. But the next day, we had a bit of extra time when we were done. And so we went out and got her a birthday cake. And we sang happy birthday, and we had birthday cake, and we had a bit of a birthday celebration for her. And when it was all done, everybody left, and I sat down on the couch. I pulled out my phone to check my messages, and I had a message from Mark. And he said, Matt, just to let you know, today is Buddy's birthday. Yeah, it was crazy. And we didn't even know. We had no idea. And we could have had the birthday cake on the day before, which was her actual birthday. But we didn't. We had it the next day. And you know what else is interesting? We were shooting a scene that day where there was a newspaper article that Buddy was in the newspaper. Well, the first line of that newspaper article said, today is Buddy Miley's birthday. And we actually happened to film it that day on his birthday and had a birthday cake that day. It's like, that's crazy, you know? It was little things like that, you know, that were just, I don't know, interesting little stories that happened as we were filming. We did have to find another house for Jimmy and Lisa's house. Now, we didn't have a house for them to use. And we were filming here in this house the whole time in Toronto, and we didn't even have a house for them. And we had a schedule already. We had dates set that we are shooting those scenes, and we did not have a location, which was crazy. So every day when I was done shooting in this house, everybody would go home, everybody would relax, and I'd be up all night trying to find another house for us to use. It was crazy. But anyways, I did finally find a house, and a few pictures of it here. Now, you'll notice that this house is a little bit more modern. Unfortunately, I couldn't find an older house that we could use. I came to a point where I was just like, I'll take anything. I just need a house. The listing on the Airbnb, they didn't mention that there was somebody who lived in the basement, and they were like an opera singer or some kind of a singer. And they were rehearsing all the time at any like crazy hours of the day and night. And they were making all kinds of noise. I'm like, oh man, what are we going to do? And it caused some delays at times. So we literally had to sit and wait for them to finish singing. And we had people on our crew would go banging on the door and stuff. They didn't care. They're probably used to it. People renting the upstairs and banging on the door, and they're like, who cares? I'm just going to sing anyways. They wouldn't even answer the door. There's nothing we could do. So we had to work around that. That was a big challenge. It was really inconvenient. Oh, that was, I mean, with all the stress and everything I had going on, I did not need that too. But the other thing was, we made it work. Another location that we needed was an airport. We had a couple scenes in an airport. And I mean, an airport, that's almost impossible to film in an airport because, you know, with all the security concerns and so forth. And the thing is, if you are able to make it work, it costs a lot of money. Mark and I looked into it a little bit, and you know, realized that if you want to shoot, like we looked at like Hamilton and Kitchener airports, things like that, you need to hire police officers to come and be on your set and pay police officers, and you have to hire the airport's own security people. You can't just bring your own security people. And then on top of all that, they wanted thousands of dollars, and they wanted all these like forms to fill out. They wanted lists of all the crew members, of all the equipment, everything all had to be checked out. It was crazy. It was going to be really expensive. So we were looking at other options other than an airport, and Mark and I went and looked at a school in Hamilton. I saw this photo and I thought that looks kind of like the outside of an airport. Maybe we could do it outside and have them wheeling some luggage that could look like an airport. And we actually took the better part of a day when we were in Hamilton. We went and met with the staff of the school and gave them a big presentation what we're doing. And then when Mark and I went and looked at that, it looks smaller, it looks bigger in the picture than it was in real life. And we're like, it was just like this tiny little concourse. And we're like, we can't do the whole scene in this tiny little section. So I was at a total loss what to do. I have a cousin who is a pilot. And I thought, well, you know what, maybe I'll ask him. Maybe he can help us. I mean, he's a pilot, right? So I asked him, and he's like, you know what, I can't help you get into an airport. Unfortunately, I cannot help you with that. But he said to me, he said, Matt, you know what, people who are traveling, they make videos all the time when they're in the airport. He said, you go into an airport and people always have their cameras out and they're making home movies, travel blogs or whatever. He said, why don't you just go there and just do it and don't even ask permission, right? And nobody will think, they'll think you're just traveling, right? Bring suitcases and just go and get your camera out and here we are. And people will just think you're making a travel blog or something like that. And I'm like, you know what? That's a great idea. Let's just do that. So that's what we did. And we had a minimal crew of people. I said, I don't want to bring lots of people. I don't want to attract attention. We didn't have like the big boom mic or anything. We just put on these little, clip-on mics on the actors. And we tried to keep it low key. And I thought, you know what? Let's give it a shot. If we get kicked out, at least we tried, right? But we did, and it actually worked. I put my camera in a suitcase, and I brought it, and I carried it, and wheeled it in. And then when we got to the spot, I would open my suitcase and take it out, and put it back in. We'd go walking, and it worked. And it actually worked really well. And these are some shots that we got in the airport, and they look great. Like this one here. I mean, that looks amazing. And nobody said anything. It was awesome. And there were like security people, whatever. They would walk. They didn't really care. I mean, we did it early on a Sunday morning, which I think was helped as well. The airport was like dead. There was like nothing going on. This is at Pearson Airport in Toronto. Yeah. I know, busiest airport in Canada. We did it. And we made it work. And there's security people, they didn't really care. They would just smile and wave, whatever. And I think it helped that, I don't know, I think it might have helped that Sean was in a wheelchair. And in this scene, actually, I was in a wheelchair with the camera in my lap. So I was the same height as him, and somebody was wheeling me, and people thought that was kind of cool. These two guys in wheelchairs and one with the camera were wheeling around, and like, that's kind of cool. Look at them, they're having fun, right? And it worked, and it looked great. We actually didn't have any trouble at all, so it was great. That was an interesting story, and it actually worked. So we also had a scene in a hotel. And again, same kind of thing. We tried to find some hotels in Toronto, and they wanted us to book the entire floor of the hotel. And again, they had all these like rules about we had to have all this insurance and all this stuff, which we didn't have. So I happened to have a connection in Ingersoll with the Comfort Inn, and I called them up, and they were like, "Yeah, no problem. It's fine. Come do whatever you want." And it's like 2 hours away from Toronto, but we made it work. And I told Mark, I said, good news is I got a hotel. Bad news is it's 2 hours away. So we had to have a full day just to travel to move everybody to Ingersoll. And there were some challenges involved with it because there was a big snowstorm that day and some of the actors were late and things like that. And so these are some scenes that we did in the Comfort Inn in Ingersoll. And they even let us use the lobby, which was great. We had an actor here, and we brought our own computer monitor. Again, we had some old 90s computer monitors here that we set up. And they didn't care. They let us stand behind the desk and pretend, that he was working there. And it was kind of stressful. When I think about the hotel scenes, I think about it being a stressful time just because we were way behind schedule. And we had a smaller crew as well because we didn't want to bring everybody from Toronto. So people were having to do extra things that they weren't part of their regular job description. One other thing I'll mention real quick is I just want to recognize all the great people we had working on the film. This is just a picture of all the different crew people that we had working on the film. Like I said, it wasn't a huge crew, but everybody did a great job. And also what I like about this group is a very diverse group. And unfortunately, it's not actually very common to have a lot of women and visible minorities involved in filmmaking nowadays. And we didn't necessarily set out to fill a certain quota of women or minorities. It just worked out that way. And I brought along people that I knew and people who were in the crew who I knew would do a good job, and each of them was hired for their giftings and their talents. Everybody has creative things that they can bring to the table. So very thankful for our crew. And I should also mention too, an interesting twist. It's an interesting twist. It's also kind of an unfortunate twist, but at the same time interesting to this whole story is about a month and a half ago, Mark had an operation on his back and actually became paralyzed himself. I know. It's tragic, but at the same time, an ironic twist as well that he just made this film about a man who was paralyzed. And thankfully it's not permanent. But through that experience, he has learned to appreciate what Buddy went through even more so, and wants to add something to the end of the film to share the story of people like him who have had to live through a similar situation where they had to deal with paralysis and were able to find hope and find recovery. And nowadays with the medical technology available, who were able to recover. So to give hope to people who may be living through a similar situation and try to end on a positive note in some way.